Hello, listeners. This is Kat. Welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Splintering Ice. This will be Part 3, Chapter 3, entitled Breaking. Shota's entire life has been built on being rational. That's what he bases his patrols on, his outsourcing missions with the police and other heroes, his underground work, even his teaching. There's a reason he is known for his long list of expulsions. In any instance where something has gone wrong, like, hypothetically speaking, someone falls into a frozen lake, standing there in shock is 100% not rational. Immediate action is what is rational and what is needed. Even so, as soon as the water stops sloshing at the edges of the newly formed hole in the ice, all Shota can manage to do is stare. It only lasts for a moment, a couple seconds at most, and then his feet are pulling him forward, without much of any thought at all. His capture weapon is uncoiled, swirling above his head as he eases his way closer to the hole. The ice creaks under his feet, smaller cracks appearing beneath him. He growls, gaze flashing from his feet to the hole, back again. He feels his heart beating a mile a minute as his mind races to figure out the solution to the situation. How was he going to get close enough to reach in with his binding cloth and snatch Midoriya? He couldn't get closer. The ice already creaking under his weight, more cracks webbing around him, made it plenty obvious that he was too heavy. He couldn't jump in after him either. For obvious reasons, he'd do Midoriya no good by being just as catatonic as the kid will surely be once he gets out. He was going to have to race against time to get Midoriya to safety, and he won't be able to do that if he's freezing solid after each step through the snow. Damn it! He hisses through his teeth, shifting his weight from one foot to the other to test his current reach. He wouldn't be able to do much on the ice, wouldn't be able to reach into the water, even if he was able to do that and locate Midoriya simultaneously without problem. He wouldn't be able to find purchase on the ice. It'd snap beneath his feet under two people's weight. He has to. Something hammers on the ice beneath Shota's feet, and the underground hero feels the breath catch in his lungs. He quickly brushes the snow away with his foot, crouching low and looking through the ice. It's murky. The ice obscures his view, but he knows for certain that he sees the bare skin of a hand on the other side. Shota takes a step back, feet still very much on the ice. It doesn't matter. He just needs to break through, and then he'll figure out the rest after that. He swings his leg up, has it arch into the air before bringing it down with all his strength. His foot goes through, more webs of cracks flying out from the impact site. He finds himself thinking back to when Midoriya fell through. The kid had been thrown backward. Back, impacting roughly with the ice. That must have been the reason for it splintering and ultimately shattering. It was freezing out, but it wasn't cold enough for the lake to be frozen solid all the way through. The ice on top was just strong enough to hold up an individual's weight, but at any unneeded pressure, and it was as good as being fragile glass. His leg is soaked from his mid-calf down to his foot. When he pulls it back onto the surface of the ice, without another thought, Shota shuffles backward, feeling for the secure sensation of solid ground beneath his feet instead of the ominous give that the ice gave with every step he took. He finds solid ground within moments, not hesitating in shooting his capture weapon into the water. He's had to do this plenty of times in class. It was easy enough to keep an eye out on his students when the water was clear and it was bright out. But this water is murky, and the sky is heavily clouded, and snow is trying its damnedest to blind him with every passing second. The only reason he successfully gets a hold of Midoriya is because of how close to the surface he is. If he had been deeper, Shota questions if he'd be able to find him at all in these conditions. Shota braces himself and pulls with all his might. The binding cloth grows taut, and before Shota knows it, water splashing up onto the ice from the force of the body breaking the surface. The relief Shota should be feeling is very quickly squashed by the realization that it wasn't Midoriya he had managed to pull out, but rather the very villain who had put him in this position to begin with. Shota growls with venom, immediately abandoning his assistance with the villain. His hero title be damned. The villain's safety is in no way an imperative in this situation. The bastard can drown as far as he's concerned. Any other day, Shota would abide by the basic rules of hero work concerning villains. Apprehend but do not slay. Keep them alive and turn them in. Now, though, if the villain slides back under the ice and is never found by the authorities, Shota would see it as the best possible situation. But no, the villain manages to crawl across the ice, body quivering and quirk, obviously trying to fix the damage to his body. Maybe he can't concentrate. Maybe he's too far gone to even think about using Shota. It doesn't matter. Shota's too focused on scanning the ice's surface for any hint of green or skin to even think of the possibility of being used once more to help heal the villain only a few feet away from him. There are no other signs of life. Nothing smacking against the ice from below. no growing cracks. The villain slouches into the snow at the edge of the lake bonelessly. The whistling of the wind is the only sound Shota can hear beside his own heartbeat. "No," he whispers. "No, no, no, no." His only other option now is to slide himself across the ice and pray he doesn't disturb it too much to fall through himself. At this point, though, whether he falls through or gives up, it'll have the same outcome for Midoriya. As far as he's concerned, that means his only option is to try. He moves a step back out onto the ice. There's a flash of green electricity beneath the frozen shell of the lake. A muffled boom. And then all the ice shatters at once, breaking off and into the air in small crystals in large clumps. They all fly feet away from the lake, crashing down into the surrounding trees and snow. Shota has to move to avoid being hit by some of it himself, moving on instinct as his brain tries to catch up with what just happened. He's fairly confident he sees the unconscious villain get buried by a relatively large clump moments later. And then everything stills again, the water sloshing viciously as the ice pieces around them settle against the ground and among the branches of the woods. But this time Shota sees it, somehow while recovering from the unexpected shock of the situation and the snow blowing in his eyes. Shota manages to catch the small web of green electricity, flashing below the water near the center of the lake. He shoots his binding cloth forward at once, hoping for it to be the last time. The electricity fades long before the binding cloth manages to wade deep enough into the water. Shota's forced to search blind for Midoriya. The cloth wraps around something, and Shota doesn't hesitate in dragging it back up to the surface. It's heavy, but not as heavy as the villain had been. A spark of hope grows within Shota. The water sloshes when his catch breaks through the surface. Green and white, waterlogged cloth, and a purple arm is all Shota sees before he's wading through the now ice-free water, yanking at his binding cloth as he nears Midoriya. He's knee-deep in the water by the time he reaches Midoriya's side. His skin burns at the contact, feeling like he's being caught in an inferno. He doesn't focus on the kid's condition when he nears, just grabs him around the chest, soaking his sleeves up to his elbows in the process and pulls him through the water. Midoriya doesn't react. He's boneless in Shota's grasp, head lolling against his chest, arms swinging beside Shota's knees. Shota can't see his face, not yet. He finds himself unsure if he wants to. He's breathing heavily by the time he reaches the littoral zone. Midoriya's feet drag against the frozen mud beneath the water, as Shota struggles to get him up onto the snowy surface of the solid ground. He collapses backwards once he manages it, Midoriya laying halfway on top of him. The kid is soaked completely, obviously. His hair hangs in wet clumps of curling ringlets, hardening immediately as the water freezes upon contact with the air. The same water proceeds to soak through Shota's hero costume even further, dampening his torso. His shivers grow worse. He inhales heavily 3 times before he surges forward onto his knees, letting the kid fall back into the snow. "Midoriya," Shota murmurs, hands grasping the kid's shoulders in a vice-like grip. Only when Shota finds himself pausing to wait for a response does he realize that, while he's shivering uncontrollably all across his body, Midoriya is ominously still against the snow. His eyes are closed, frost accumulating on his eyelashes. There's a purple tint growing across the pale face, blue touching the kid's parted lips. The red that should be spreading out across the green cloth of his shoulder is clear and stainless. Only a faint brown tint to the cloth to even hint at there ever being an injury. "No," Shota croaks out, his tone more angry than he intended. "You are not doing this to me, kid." He sits forward, leveraging over the kid's torso. He places his ear against Midoriya's chest, feeling the sting of the freezing cloth against his face. He waits for only a second, feeling dread pulling in his stomach when no heartbeat can be heard. But then he hears it. A faint beat, followed by another moments later, far too slow and, more concernedly, no breathing. His chest is as still as can be. Probably inhaled water. Drowned. "All right, Midoriya." Shota breathes hastily, quickly brushing the soaked and snow-covered hair from both his face and Midoriya's. "You're going to have to breathe for me, okay?" Of course, Shota is only met with silence for a response, but doesn't let that stop him. He threads his fingers together, setting them to the left side of Midoriya's sternum. And then he pushes, repeatedly. He tries to ignore the creaking of Midoriya's ribcage as he counts in his head. Shota is used to the macabre. He's an underground hero, so it's more common than one would think when looking at the more grandiose examples of heroics that are shown to the public on a day-to-day basis. The point being that this isn't the first time he's had to do CPR on somebody. It isn't even the first time he's had to do CPR on someone he knows. Heroes deal with the possibility of harm every day, so he's obviously had colleagues get into trouble on his watch. This is different, though. This is a child. One that is his responsibility. One that he has watched grow over the past year. 30. Shota whispers to himself, quickly tipping Midoriya's head back, pinching his nose and clasping his lips around Midoriya's freezing cold ones. He blows, watching Midoriya's chest rise and fall, blows again, watches his chest, then proceeds back to compressions. The cold bites into the wet patches of his suit, burning along his legs and chest and arms. His nose pulses with every compression he gives. His hair hangs in thready strings in his eyes, interfering with Shota's view of Midoriya's face, lulled up and away from him, mouth still hanging open. He feels the abrupt crack of a rib snapping under his hands. Normal, he has to remind himself, especially if the individual is as skinny as Midoriya, even with the layers of muscles he's been able to pack on throughout the year. 30. Damn it! Shota pulls Midoriya's face back to him and repeats the whole process, again and again, breathing and giving compressions, the cold biting into him, his own heart beating wildly in his ribcage as he snaps another of the kid's ribs beneath his hand. Come on, problem child, Shota whispers under his breath as he enters his fourth round of compressions. Breathe for me, please. Come on. Shota tilts his head back again, breathing once into Midoriya's slack mouth, but this time, when his chest rises, it also convulses, a choking gurgle being Shota's only warning to move away. He sits up as water rises in Midoriya's throat. The kid's eyes fly open in a panic, pupils as small as needlepoints. Shota can't help the sudden mad smile that spreads across his face. There you go, kid. Shota shoves an arm under Midoriya's shoulders, flipping him onto his side immediately just as the water finally manages to escape Midoriya's lungs. The kid hacks and coughs into the snow beneath his face, head hanging limply from his neck as Shota practically holds him up. His arm is wrapped around Midoriya's torso like a seatbelt, able to feel the kid's diaphragm spasm with every desperate gasp and forced cough. He reaches forward and presses against his forehead, leveraging Midoriya's head up instead of forcing the kid to struggle with raising it. There's a gag, and then Midoriya's very suddenly throwing up all the water he had managed to swallow. The smile slips off Aizawa's face, even if the relief remains. He awkwardly pats the kid's back, rubbing circles in some form of comfort. He might not be the best at comforting or being gentle, but that doesn't mean he lacks the capability to be either. He is just very particular on what circumstances need it, and what circumstances actually just need tough love. This instance needs the rare, gentle type of treatment. Get it out, Midoriya. Shota murmurs close to the kid's ear. It's all right. You're fine. Midoriya's shaking, Shota realizes, tremors running up and down his entire body now, a far cry from the stillness that had overcome Midoriya mere minutes ago. He struggles to stay in the semi-upright position Shota has him in, as though he's expected to hold up any of his weight at the moment. His right arm, the one still wrapped thickly in Shota's scarf, hangs uselessly by his side. Eventually, Midoriya's convulsions finish, leaving puddles of his water and vomit in front of the teen. Shota scrunches his nose, moving the two of them away from the sick. Drool hangs from Midoriya's mouth, and while it will probably be embarrassing for both of them in the future, Shota grabs a swatch of his capture scarf and wipes the mucus away. They stay like that for several moments. Midoriya doesn't say a thing, laying limply in the position Shota had placed him in against his chest, breathing deeply with his eyes closed. Not asleep, though. Not yet. The quirk to his eyebrow that suggests discomfort is enough of a clue for Shota to know that, even though the danger is over, they aren't actually out of the woods yet. He eyes the pile of ice and snow mere feet away from them, the place where the villain had collapsed. He had not drowned. He'd been able to drag himself out of the water. So what had happened with Midoriya? They had fallen in together. Had the villain attacked underwater? No, they both would have been too shocked by the cold to even consider fighting under the ice. But the villain had also had a clean slate once he went under. No injuries to account for. His only focus was trying to get out, hammering against the ice. Midoriya must have been still distracted by the stab wound in his shoulder to focus straight away. Shock. He was probably in shock. Now, in fact. Shota pulls him closer to himself at the thought. So, by the time Shota had been helping the villain out of the ice mistakenly, Midoriya was probably just then realizing the predicament he was in. He had probably swam up, with difficulty due to his wound, and pounded against the ice. But Shota had been too distracted, with his angry thoughts towards the villain, to hear them. In his desperation, The kid used his quirk and... Shota finally looks down to the purple appendage draped in his capture weapon, hanging limply at Midoriya's side. Midoriya had lost control in his desperation, couldn't control his output, and ended up going all out. It broke the ice to pieces, and allowed for Shota to get to him, but it also snapped the bone in his arms, like twigs. Shota grimaces, shuffling Midoriya back against the snow so he could lay down. He hesitantly grabs a hold of the limb, turning it tenderly. He immediately stops when a small whimper escapes Midoriya's catatonic form. He needs to secure it before they get out of there, and they do need to get out of there. Shota's shivers are growing worse, but Midoriya's are starting to grow faint. Midoriya, this is going to hurt. Midoriya turns his face slightly, his eyelashes now completely white, and his soaked hair beginning to get covered in frost as well, hardening in wisps against his forehead. He blinks up at Shota, eyes fogged over, but clear enough to confirm he understands somewhat. I'm sorry, kid. Without any hesitation, Shota bends the arm and pushes it to Midoriya's chest. The kid yowls, the scream being carried through the wind when it escapes the teen's ravaged throat. Shota hurries in wrapping his binding cloth around the kid's torso to secure it, but every time he puts pressure on the wrap, a croaking moan escapes Midoriya's blue lips. He ignores the sounds to the best of his ability, murmuring repeated apologies to at least try to soothe the kid at least a little, knowing that he doesn't have time to cater to Midoriya as much as he should be. He still needs to take care of the stab wound once they get someplace warm, as well as the ribs he broke, and... Shota blinks, pausing and tying off the makeshift sling. He reaches forward, clasping the back of Midoriya's neck. Midoriya's eyes blink open at that, glossy and not entirely there, but he at least doesn't fight Shota when the older man pulls him from the ground for only a second, revealing a blood-soaked patch beneath Midoriya's head. It all snaps into place for Shota then, the final piece. Why and how Midoriya managed to drown moments after opening his own gateway to freedom. His quirk makes it to where he has to have leverage of some kind, a solid stance. Momentum shooting him forward so he isn't forced backwards when he uses his augmented strength. But underwater, Midoriya wouldn't have anywhere to find leverage against. He'd be forced to be thrown back, and in this case, aiming up at the ice above him would shoot him down to the hard stone and dirt below him, cracking his head against the ground while unable to prevent it. Shota hesitantly runs his fingers through the damp and hardening curly hair, paying close attention to Midoriya's face so he can know if he's touched a tender spot. It doesn't take long. His fingers feel something warm, a notable change, tacky and coating a small patch of Midoriya's hair. He doesn't intrude on the wound too much, knowing he can't do much in the low light, but knowing, now that they were also dealing with a head wound, was important. They had to get someplace safe and warm. Now. No options. Midoriya, Shota calls, clasping his shoulder while still supporting the back of his head. Are you with me? Midoriya blinks up at him in a daze, but gives a small nod. Aizawa-sensei. Shota forces his expression to soften at that. Good. Good job, kid. You're doing good. Shota reaches for Midoriya's unwound arm and pulls it over his shoulder. As much as he hates it, he needs Midoriya to help him here. He can't have the kid falling to sleep for multiple reasons. Secondary drowning, concussion complications, hypothermia complications. The list could go on, just... The kid needs to stay awake until they reach an outpost. From this area, the closest outpost would be the one All Might is lodged in. That's their destination, somewhere warm with a first aid kit, and somewhere to defend themselves and contact everyone else. God knows they need the assistance ASAP. And Mike was still waiting for him to call in. The guy was probably freaking out at this point. That's a matter for another time. Get ready, Midoriya, Shota murmurs, standing up and tightening his hold on Midoriya's arm. Up we get. Midoriya obviously stumbles, vertigo hitting him. He practically collapses into Shota's side, head lolling against Shota's shoulder, but the underground hero merely pulls him closer, looping an arm around his back. He waits for Midoriya to recover somewhat, and to his surprise, or not so surprise, Midoriya is the one to take the first step. Shota smiles slightly, pleased to still see the spark of proactivity in his wounded student. They hobble through the snow, swaying back and forth with the wind and snow. All Might's sanction was only about 3 miles away, possibly a bit more, looking down at Midoriya cuddled up at his side with green eyes far too distant. Shota just hopes they can make it in time. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 3 of Splintering Ice. Chapter 4 will be next. Let me know your all's thoughts and reactions, and as always, thank you so much for listening.